Good morning, children. Welcome back. Okay, today also we'll be dealing with the direct and the indirect speech. Okay, I had given you in the previous class, I had given you several rules, isn't it, that you're supposed to follow while changing the direct speech into the indirect. The first one was you'll have to change the adverb of nearness to that of distance. That was rule number 1. Like now in the direct speech becomes then in the indirect speech. Yesterday becomes the previous day in the indirect speech, and so on, isn't it? Rule 2 was you're supposed to change the pronouns in order not to change the meaning of the sentence. You're supposed to change the pronouns in order not to change the meaning of the sentence. That was rule number 2, okay, or rule number 3 also you can call it. And then another rule I talked about was if the reporting verb is in the present or the future, then the reported speech also has to be in the present or future. It can't be in the past, okay? And I'd given you several examples also. Don't worry, I'm going to send everything in your WhatsApp class, okay? And come to the next one. That is I talked about the exception, isn't it? Like for universal truths, isn't it? For universal truths, the tense of the direct speech remains unchanged. Even the reporting verb, for example, okay, there are exceptions, okay. There are exceptions, okay, for universal truth. For universal truth. Even if the reporting verb is in the past, then the reported speech has to be in the present. Like for example, the teacher said, isn't it? The teacher said. This is the reporting verb, and the other part is known as the reporting speech, isn't it? The sun rises in the east. The sun rises. The sun rises in the east, isn't it? The sun rises in the east, okay? So this one is in the past and this one is in the present, isn't it? So, but for universal truth, the reporting speech has to remain unchanged. It should remain in the present itself, because the universal truth, like the sun rises in the east, is going to happen till eternity, isn't it? Till eternity, and it can't be stopped, or it can't be termed as past. So that is the reason, even if the reporting verb is in the past, the reporting speech has to be in the present. Like if you'll have to change it into indirect, you'll have to write the teacher said. The teacher said that the sun rises in the east, okay? This is direct speech and this one is indirect speech, okay? You can't write the teacher said that the sun rose in the east. You'll have to write the teacher said that the sun rises in the east, okay? Now come to rules for imperative sentences. Now children, what are imperative sentences? I'll tell you. Rules for imperative sentences, okay? Now see, what is an imperative sentence? An imperative sentence is, or as imperative sentences have a command or an order or request, an advice or a suggestion. Any sentence that talks about a command or an order or a request or an advice or a suggestion, it is known as imperative. It's known as imperative sentences, isn't it? That expresses a command, a request, an advice, or a suggestion. Like open the door, it's a command. Please help me, it's a request, isn't it? Quit smoking, it's an advice. Don't make noise, it's an order or a command, isn't it? So, in order to change these kind of imperative sentences into indirect speech, you'll have to use words like specific words like requested, ordered, advised, suggested. Now see the sentence examples, how you are supposed to change the imperative sentences in the direct speech. If you have to change it into indirect, you'll have to use specific words. Again, I'm repeating, specific words like requested, advised, suggested, etc. Okay, so sentence example. Sentence example: she said to me, comma, please help me. Okay, this one is a request, isn't it? So you'll have to change this one into this imperative speech in the direct speech. If you'll have to change into indirect, you'll have to use words like requested. She requested me to help her. Okay, this one is in the indirect speech. Okay, so again I'm repeating, if you'll have to, in the imperative sentences, if you'll have to change it into indirect, you'll have to use words like advised, requested, suggested, etc. Okay, another example, I'm going to read it out to you. The teacher said to him, don't waste your time. Okay, so the teacher, if you'll have to change it into indirect, you'll have to write, teacher advised him not to waste his time. Okay, now come to the rules for interrogative sentences. Okay, look at the example carefully. Come to the rules for interrogative sentences. Interrogative sentences. Okay, so children, you'll have to remember there are two main kinds of interrogative sentences. The ones which start with an auxiliary verb. Now, what is an auxiliary verb? It's a helping verb like are, were, will, isn't it? These are known as auxiliary verbs. So there are two kinds of interrogative sentences, starting off with auxiliary verbs, and another one is starting off with question words like what, when, how, which, etc. Okay, so you'll have to remember there are two types of interrogative sentences, one starting with auxiliary verbs or helping verbs, the other starting off with question words like which, where, when, why, how, etc. Okay. Now, interrogative sentences beginning with an auxiliary verbs are changed into indirect speech by using the connective if or whether. Okay, so supposing if the interrogative sentence is starting off with auxiliary verbs, like for example, she said to me, are you coming with us? Are you coming? Are is an auxiliary verb, the helping verb, isn't it? So she said to me, are you coming with us? Isn't it? So in such sentences, in the indirect speech, you'll have to use connective words, or yes, you'll have to use connective words like, or you'll have to use connective likes if or whether. So how you're going to change it into indirect? She asked me if I was coming with them. You'll have to In interrogative sentences starting off with auxiliary verbs, you'll have to use the connectives like if or whether. So she asked me if I was going with them. Okay. And another thing that you'll have to remember is you'll have to use, for changing the interrogative sentences into the indirect speech, you'll have to use specific words like questioned, asked, okay, inquired, demanded, etc. Okay, queried, etc. You'll have to use specific words like questioned, asked, inquired, etc. Okay, so I'll give you sentence examples for this one. Sentence example. Number 1 is she said to me. Me, starting off with an auxiliary verb are, isn't it? Are you coming with us? Are you coming with us? Okay, so you'll have to write she asked me. You'll have to use the connectives like if or whether, isn't it? If I was coming or going, okay? If I was going with them. Okay, if in case of auxiliary verbs, interrogative sentences starting with auxiliary verbs like are, you'll have to use the connectives like if or whether. She asked me whether I was coming with them or going with them. Okay, whether I was coming with them is also correct. This is in the direct and this is in the indirect speech. Okay, and children, one more rule number 3, that is, in order not to change the meaning of the sentence, you'll have to change the pronouns. Isn't it? Us over here becomes them in the indirect speech. Okay, that was rule 3. Okay, and another example, I'm going to read it out to you, and again I'm repeating, you'll have to use words like inquired, question, asked, etc. Okay, she said to me, am I to wait for you till eternity? That's in the direct speech. Okay, so if you'll have to change it into indirect, you'll have to write, she inquired of him if she was to wait for him till eternity. Now see children, over here there is an object. She said to him. There is an object. Him is the object. In such cases, you'll have to use words like inquired of, demanded of, questioned. No, inquired of, not questioned. Inquired of. Okay. So she inquired of him if she was to wait for him till eternity. M is also an auxiliary verb, isn't it? Am I to wait for you till eternity? So in such interrogative sentences starting with auxiliary verbs like am, were, are, will, you'll have to use connectives if, isn't it? So she inquired of him if she was to wait for him till eternity. Okay, another example is, don't you know the way home? I said to her. Isn't it? So I asked her whether she did not know the way home. Okay, don't worry, I'm going to send you everything. Now come to the last one, that is rules for exclamatory sentence. Rules for exclamatory sentences. So you all already know what's an exclamatory sentence. When a sentence expresses a feeling of wonder, joy or sorrow, it's an exclamatory sentence, isn't it? Different types of sentences, you have already done that one. Examples are, hurrah, I won the competition. That's the state of joy. Alas, I couldn't qualify the exam. That's the state of sorrow. That is very, very sad that he couldn't qualify for the examination, isn't it? And the next one is, wow, what a beautiful car. Okay, so that's the state of wonder, that he's wondering that the car is very, very beautiful. So if you'll have to change such exclamatory sentences in the direct speech, it's there. And if you'll have to change it into indirect, okay, you'll have to use specific words like exclaimed. Okay, for interrogative sentences, you'll have to use specific words like inquired, questioned, asked, and asked and queried, isn't it? Here in the exclamatory sentences, you'll have to use specific word like exclaimed. Okay, exclaimed with joy, exclaimed with sorrow, exclaimed with wonder. Okay, now see the sentence example. They said, hurrah. It's a state of wonder, isn't it? Hurrah. An exclamation mark. Hurrah, we won the match. They're expressing their happiness, isn't it? Hurrah, we won the match. We won the match. Okay. So this is in the direct. If you'll have to change it into indirect, you'll have to write exclaimed with joy, because it's a state of joy that he's very, very happy. So it's state of happiness, isn't it? So you'll have to write they exclaimed with joy. They exclaimed with joy. With joy that they had won the match. Okay, so see, this is the state of joy, rules for exclamatory sentences in the direct speech. She said, hurrah, we won the match. So you'll have to use specific words like exclaimed with wonder, exclaimed with joy, exclaimed with sorrow, etc., isn't it? So I'm going to read out a few examples for you. He said, alas, I failed the test. Okay, he was very, very sad. State of sorrow, isn't it? He exclaimed with sorrow that he failed the test. Okay, so this marks the end of the direct and indirect speech. If you have any problems, feel free to contact me. Thank you.